When God put Noah in the grand old ark, he put a rainbow in the cloud. When the thunder rolled and the skies grew dark, God put a rainbow in the cloud. God put a rainbow in the cloud. God put a rainbow in the cloud. When it looked like the sun wouldn't shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the cloud. I'm here this morning to talk about the power of words, of our language. And I hope we're all in agreement on that point, that words have power. For my own self, I must admit I was first impressed with the power of words when I read in the Bible that God spoke his creation into existence. Now that's power. None of us have power of that grand a scale, but our words, our thoughts, how we express them, they have power of their own. We have power to create, to build up, or to tear down. And we need to be wise about how we use that power, and to be creative and gracious about how we use that power. Now, I am a poet, and I love words. Otherwise, I would not have spent all my life crafting words into stories. I've been called by some of my critics a natural writer. Well, that comes right after a natural heart surgeon, because being a writer is hard work. Nathaniel West said, the easiest reading is the darn hardest writing. And he was so right. Writing is work. And when I write, I'm going to work. I rent a hotel room anytime I am writing on a project. And I am in that hotel room ready to work at 6:30 every morning. I've had them strip the walls bare, no pictures, no clocks, no TV, no radio, nothing except the bed, the desk chair, and the lighting. And I walk in there with a stack of these yellow legal pads and a fistful of ballpoint pens, because I write everything out by hand. I also go in with a Bible, a dictionary, a thesaurus, a bottle of sherry, a deck of cards, and it used to be a carton of cigarettes and an ashtray, but no more. The cards are for solitaire, because I find that if my small mind is busy with my hands looking and following for patterns of red and black, that my big mind is able to work freely. So that playing the solitaire is really part of the writing process. Now, I worked like that until 12:30, 1 o'clock in the day. And then I go out into the real world and shop, prepare a meal, sometimes for company, but always a good meal for myself. I am a good cook. And then at about 8 o'clock in the evening, I pull out what I've written in the morning. And I edit. I make cuts and suggestions, move things around, plans for what I need to do to improve the piece. And then the very next day, I'm back there in that hotel room at 6:30, working. Now, I am a poet, but I did not start writing poetry or speaking poetry until I was moved to change my commitment to not talk. For 5 years, I did not speak as a child, except to my older brother, Bailey. I wrote everything I had to communicate, or I simply shook my head. I did not speak. And everyone in this little town of Stamps, Arkansas, where I grew up, especially the black community, understood that I was not speaking, but they kept trying to encourage me to speak. And the one person who was successful was Mrs. Flowers. Mrs. Flowers was the aristocrat in black Stamps. You know, the kind who always wore a hat, white gloves, carried a proper purse, all accessories matching. Well, she would invite me to tea. And she would serve me tea and then read aloud to me. And she started with A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, but then moved on to poetry and pretty much stayed there, because there must have been something on my face when I heard her reading that poetry that let her know that I loved what I was hearing. And she told me, "Marguerite, you think you love poetry, but until you feel it roll over the back of your tongue, between your teeth and over your lips, you will never truly love poetry." So that encouraged me. I got all of my poetry books, which I had been reading, and I would go under our house, where I thought no one would hear us, and I would start to read poetry aloud. And I heard that my voice, my words could create music with language. Well, perhaps you were wondering why I chose not to speak for 5 years. Well, when I was 7, I was attacked. And when I testified in the attacker's trial, he was found guilty. But it was that night, or maybe the next night, I overheard the policemen when they came to our house. They told my grandmother that they found the attacker's body in an alley, beaten and kicked to death. And in my 7.5-year-old mind, I thought that my words had killed him, that my words had that kind of power, and I was not going to speak again. What if I hurt someone I loved, or even killed them? So I did not speak from the age of 7 until 12 years old. But I will show you how out of evil there can come good. During those 5 years that I did not speak, I read. I read every book in the black school library. I read every book I could get my hands on from the white school library. I memorized Paul Laurence Dunbar, James Weldon Johnson, Count D. Cullen, and Langston Hughes. I memorized Shakespeare, whole plays, 50 sonnets. I memorized Edgar Allan Poe, all of the poetry, never having heard it. I had Longfellow, Balzac, Guy de Maupassant, Rudyard Kipling. It was a Catholic kind of reading of story. And when I decided to speak again, I had a lot to say, and many ways in which to say it. Well, let me tell you who I was in Stamps, Arkansas. I was born Marguerite Annie Johnson. And I had one brother, and his name was Bailey, and he was a year older than I. And when I was 3 and he was 4, our parents had moved to California and decided to divorce. So they put little tags on us at the age of 3 and 4 that said, "Deliver to Mrs. Annie Henderson," that's our father's mother, "in Stamps, Arkansas." And they put us on trains in Southern California. San Diego was where they were living, and we went to live with Mrs. Annie Henderson, the woman I call Mama, because she raised us. And we were there from my age, 3 until 7, when our father appeared again. And we thought, oh, he is going to take us back to California with him. But he didn't. He left us with our mother in St. Louis, Missouri, where I was attacked. And once I had decided not to speak, they said, oh, we don't want this sullen, morose child around here. And they sent us back to Stamps, Arkansas. But I felt safe there and so loved. My grandmother was a big woman with large hands and a soft voice. And she was very strong and determined. She ran the only store in the black part of Stamps, and she had built that business up by herself. We were loved in that community. I was her shadow. Oh, Sister Henderson, I see you got your shadow with you today, and that was always me. But we were carefully taught what we could do or say or not do and say when we crossed the tracks into the white part of Stamps. I never understood it. I couldn't look anyone in the eye, and the few times that I did, it didn't matter their age, their education. Those white people would look at me with such loathing. But after I had stopped speaking, I came back to Black Stamps, and they embraced me and accepted me, not as a sullen, morose child that they had to get rid of, but they understood that I was going to write and speak through my brother, Bailey. Now, in those little black schools, one teacher would have several grade levels. And it finally happened that I was going to be in Bailey's class. And not only that, we were going to have the new teacher. And on that first day, she asked everyone to stand in turn, say their name and their previous year's grade. And when it got to me, I got up and started to walk toward the board. And she said, "Where do you think you're going?" And all the children said, "Oh, Miss Williams, she's going to write her answer on the board. She don't talk." And Miss Williams said, "Oh, I've heard about you. You are not going to do that in my class. You stand right there and speak." I was confused. I knew that I dare not speak, but I also knew that I was to obey the teacher. And then Bailey popped up and said, "No, really, Miss Williams, she'll do just fine. Just let her write her answers on the board." But Miss Williams kept looking at me. "Speak! Speak!" Getting more and more angry until she finally slapped me across my face. And I ran home. And Bailey followed. And when I ran into the store, Mama said, "Why, sister, what are you doing here in the middle of the day?" And Bailey had arrived, and he told her what happened. And Mama said, "Now, Junior, you go back to school, and you get your lessons. Marguerite, you go out to the pump and wash off your face and cool off." And then she took off her apron, left the store in Uncle Willie's charge, and took me by the hand straight back to the school and into Mrs. Williams' class. And then she went up to Miss Williams and said, "Miss Williams, do you have a grandmother?" And Miss Williams had to admit that, yes, she did have a grandmother. And then Mama said, "Well, this is my grandbaby." And then she slapped Miss Williams across her face. Well, she turned to me after that and said, "Marguerite, what I did was wrong, but I wanted to teach a lesson. Now you go sit down and get your lessons." And no one spoke about that incident after that. But when I got home, Uncle Willie said, "Go into the kitchen, Marguerite. There's something special for you." And there on the kitchen table was Mama's caramel cake. Oh, made from scratch, and by far her most famous recipe. So I brought it out on the porch to slice it and share with everyone. And Uncle Willie said, "Now, Marguerite, I don't want you to think that this is for anything you've done. This is just to show you that we love you." I was loved, but I did not stay there for the rest of my growing up. You see, when Bailey was 14, that would make me 13, he saw something that no one should ever see. He was on the white side of the tracks when he saw two white men pulling a black man's body out of the river. And it was all swollen and mutilated and stinky. And they grabbed the first black men they saw, and unfortunately they saw Bailey and said, "You take this here to the jail." So they went over and picked up this dead body and took it into the jail and put it into a jail cell where they were told to do it. And when they turned around, those white men had slammed the door shut and locked them in the cell with that stinky body. My brother Bailey was in a panic. He didn't know what to do, but them older black men just, "Oh, boss, oh, please don't lock us in here. We didn't have anything to do with this. We just were doing what you told us to do." And then finally those men turned around and laughed and said it was just a joke, some joke, and they let him go. And when Bailey got home and shared that story, he asked Uncle Willie, why do they hate us so? And Uncle Willie said, "Well, it's not hate exactly. It's they're scared. That's all. It's fear that makes them act so mean." Well, Mama decided right then Stamps was not going to be a safe place for her to raise Bailey. And we went to live with our mother, who was in California. A woman I did not know and I did not love. It was very hard being left there by Mama. I was not happy, but I was raised to be polite. But after 6 or 8 weeks, my mother had a sit-down talk-to, as she called it, came into my room and said, Maya, by that time my brother's nickname for me had stuck. Maya, you've been here almost 2 months and you've never called me anything. Now I understand you might not want to call me mommy or mother, but you need to call me something. What do you want to call me? And I said, lady. She said, why would you want to call me lady? Because you're too pretty to be a mother. And she was too. She was everything I wasn't. She was small and petite and beautiful and dressed with great style and carried herself with great confidence and energy. She just attracted people when she walked into a room. Yes, she said, I like it. You can call me lady. But then she took my face in her hands and she said, Maya, since you've been here, you have not smiled. I want you to smile for me, please. And she tried saying funny little things and faces, and I was like, no, I'm not smiling at this woman. Until finally, I broke, and I smiled. And she smiled with tears running down her face. And she said, I knew it. I knew you would have a beautiful smile. You are beautiful, she said. And she kissed me. And as sure as I am of the love my family had for me in stamps, no one had ever said that I was beautiful. And no one had ever kissed me. Well, from that moment on, I was ladies, and she was mine. She respected me as a human being, even in spite of the fact that I was young, and she loved me and supported me, encouraged me, to the point that when I was looking at high school graduation and I had to tell her that I was pregnant, she asked me, does he, the father, love you? And I said, no. Do you love him? And I said, no. She said, well then, you're going to have this baby, and he will be our baby, and we'll love him and raise him up. And that's what we did. And that's where my first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, that's where it ends, with my finishing high school a few weeks later, giving birth to Guy, my only child, and then striking out at 17 on my own. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a book that I didn't think I would write. I was terribly depressed. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated on my birthday. I was about to have my 40th birthday party when I got the news. And I fell into a deep depression. You know how that is. You don't want to eat, you don't sleep, you're just miserable. Well, James Baldwin, I called him Jimmy because we were close friends, came by and said, Maya, get up, we're going over to Jules and Judy Pfeiffer's house. And I did. And we all got drunk and shared childhood stories. And Judy Pfeiffer was convinced that I had a book in me. And she convinced an editor at Random House Publishers that he should get me to write an autobiography. And when he first asked, I said, no. For goodness sakes, I'm a poet, not an autobiographer. And then he said, oh, please write this autobiography. No, I'm only 40 years old. For goodness sakes, come back in 20 years. I have nothing to write about. And then he said, please, we need you. No, I am a poet, although I am about to go to California and write a 10-part series for public television on Black American culture. I don't have time. But then Jimmy Baldwin told him, if you want Maya to do something, you have to tell her she can't. And so the next time he called and he said, I understand that you want to write autobiography. It's nearly impossible to write autobiography as good literature. Nearly impossible. I didn't have to think. I'll try. And I did. Sitting at my mother's kitchen table in California, I wrote my story as honestly and as openly as I could about all my faults, all the strengths I was aware of, and how God was gracious to me in just helping me survive. And then it was published, and I was terrified. If people know the truth about me, they won't like me anymore. They'll be angry with me and upset with me, and they won't read the book. But it was just the opposite. People loved the book. And I think it's because I was so honest about myself. And yet, in writing about myself, it was clear that I forgave myself. And that takes courage. And people recognize that if I could forgive myself, they could forgive themselves, and they had the courage to do it. It takes courage to forgive, to love, to be honest. I believe that courage is the most important virtue, because unless you have courage, you cannot practice any of the other virtues with consistency. And we all have courage. The courage to get up and go to work, or the courage to come in and take a test you're not too excited about taking. The courage to have patience with your children or patience with your parents. The courage to go to a new school or try to make new friends. So I'm going to close with some words that I hope encourage you. You can write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You can trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides. Just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Lowered, bowed head and lowered eyes. Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my mournful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't take it awful hard. 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words. You can cut me with your eyes. You can kill me with your hatefulness. But still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness surprise you? Don't take it as a surprise, like I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Out of a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wonderfully clear, I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream, and the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise. Thank you for listening.